Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our external consulting webinar series. My name is Tony Chiak, and I serve as the unit head within Management Engineering and Consulting. During this webinar, we will discuss Mayo Clinic's approach to the digital transformation, including a recent electronic health record implementation and new tools in the areas of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other digital tools that are becoming more widespread and available to healthcare. First, I'd like to share some information about Mayo Clinic and our department, Management Engineering and Consulting. Here is some information on the Mayo Clinic enterprise. In Rochester, we see approximately 400,000 patients per year with 2,380 physicians and scientists, including 125 primary care providers. In the community and regional health system, we have it set up in 4 regions with 18 hospitals, and we are in 75 communities in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. The Mayo Clinic Health System sees approximately 525,000 patients per year with 1,140 physicians. At the Mayo Clinic in Arizona, we see approximately 115,000 patients per year with 621 physicians and scientists. And in the Mayo Clinic in Florida, we see 110,000 patients per year with 559 physicians and scientists. Now I'd like to share some background on Management Engineering and Consulting Department at Mayo Clinic. ME&C was founded in 1947 and have been engaged in the healthcare consulting business for over 70 years. Our mission is to partner with clients to achieve the best patient experience through objective, innovative, and integrative business consulting. And our key capability is end-to-end internal and external consulting across the practice, research, education, and administration within the enterprise setting. And here are a few details about our staff in Management Engineering and Consulting. We have approximately 200 team members made up of health systems engineers, project managers, and support staff. We pride ourselves on attracting and retaining a very diverse workforce. We have been able to attract diversified and talented staff that have lived and worked in 36 different countries. We also have very multidisciplinary educational backgrounds and experience. For instance, we have people from business administration, nursing, organizational leadership, engineering, finance, public health, and many other areas. We have 5 main service lines. The first one is Management Systems and Process Engineering. This is where we apply a variety of engineering tools to improve business performance, such as Lean Six Sigma, advanced analytics, simulation modeling, and optimization. We help integrate multiple disciplines to study and solve complex problems using a systems approach. The next is Strategy, Design, and Execution. We help develop and refine business objectives, define key business measurements, and accelerate design and development of key strategic initiatives. The next is Change Management and Organizational Transformation. This involves vision design and development, change management, planning, and implementation of best practices. The next is Revenue Enhancement and Expense Management. This is where we work on business process redesign to decrease operational expense, improve supply chain efficiency, and identify new revenue opportunities. The final one is Project Management, where we utilize a structured and disciplined methodology of project framework to deliver improvement plans to complex projects. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. Our first guest speaker is Cris Ross. Cris has 30 years of experience in healthcare, technology, and government. At Mayo Clinic, he is responsible for all information technology. Since joining in 2012, he has revamped IT strategy, helped lead an enterprise-wide electronic health record convergence program, developed partnerships, and initiated major innovation programs in data, analytics, and machine learning. Prior to joining Mayo Clinic, he held technology and business leadership roles with SureScripts, Minute Clinic, and United Health Group. Our next guest speaker is Jan Jasperson. Jan is a section head in the Department of Management Engineering and Consulting at Mayo Clinic. She is responsible for driving short and long-term strategic and operating plans which support the Mayo Clinic strategic plan. Recently, she led a large team of health systems engineers and project managers on one of Mayo Clinic's largest initiatives to transition to a single instance integrated electronic health record and revenue cycle management system. Previously, Jan worked in the neurological and neurosurgical intensive care unit as a registered nurse and nurse manager within the Department of Nursing at Mayo Clinic. Well, welcome, Jan and Cris.
Good morning.
Thank you, Tony.
I'd like to start with you, Cris. Can you share where Mayo Clinic is today with our information technology transformation as we've gone through an electronic record implementation and now getting into artificial intelligence and machine learning?
Sure. So we're going fast, and now we're going faster. Acceleration every day. So, technological change sometimes happens in waves, and we had a wave that began maybe in 2013 when we launched 2 task forces. One was to determine what we should do with our electronic health record system, and we're going to talk more about that. And the second was to evaluate what our technology strategy should be, and that launched a whole bunch of initiatives. But we've had significant investment and significant change over the last few years. We did this EHR implementation from 2015 through 2018. We developed new technology to manage data in modern and sophisticated ways. And now we have this new wave of change that's coming in with our 2030 strategy and our new CEO, Dr. Gianrico Ferrugia, that's looking forward to how can we build Mayo Clinic to become increasingly more of a technology platform company to supplement and augment what we've done historically for decades. We're looking at digital enablement to create new capabilities for our physicians and for the patients who come to receive care here. And as you say, lots and lots of projects in artificial intelligence and machine learning, somewhere between 200 and 300, depending on how you count, and more every day.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks. Could you give our audience a sense of the magnitude of change we've gone through with implementing digital tools such as Epic, our new EHR?
Right. Well, we're going to go into that in some more detail around the project operational stuff, and Jan will talk more about it. I know it's been really a privilege to partner with Jan and the other colleagues in ME&C. But I would characterize it maybe in a slightly different way than by the numbers, which is this changed the way that every one of our doctors, nurses, pharmacists, physical therapists, medical techs, everybody interacted with patients. That was a huge change. Even though we've been using electronic health record systems for a really long time, in Florida going back 25 years, in Rochester and Arizona almost the same amount of time, it's a big deal to change the workflow, the way that you look up information around a patient and so on. And helping everyone get the system that they really wanted to get is always a big challenge. And we're not done yet. There's a lot to be done to optimize our system. But we had to touch every workstation. We upgraded every monitor used by physicians in the inpatient and outpatient practice, the nurses in their computer on wheels and other systems. We moved 10 years of data from old systems into the Epic system. And you can imagine how complicated that is to try and convert 10 years of data from one structure into another so it can be used by clinicians. And then, by the way, the practice wasn't patient to just have the EHR system. When it became clear that that would cause a pause in some other areas, we accelerated a whole bunch of other things. So, in addition to a new EHR, we put in a new system for dictation, a new system for radiology management, a new system for document management, a new system for single sign-on, and on and on.
Wow.
So it was a huge project with lots of air traffic control to keep all the pieces and parts together and landing at the same time.
So when you sit down with your colleagues and our information technology vendors and partners, how do you outline success and how do you measure success?
Right. Well, as everybody listening to this probably knows, Mayo's core values are the needs of the patient come first. And we always want to start with how can any technology system better cure, treat, and help a patient in their journey to wellness. So that underlies everything. One step back from that is what's the relationship between the clinician and the patient? What can we do to make it easier for the clinician to have an interaction with the patient that's therapeutically thorough, that's safe, that includes all of the science we want to include, and is also easy and clean to use for our clinicians, whether that's a a nurse on the floor in an inpatient setting, or a physician acting in an independent way in an outpatient office visit all by themselves. Trying to get all of those modalities right is a complicated thing. And some of those things have become more generic over time, right? There's learnings that have happened in other health systems that then get infused into these technology systems that we use, and then we take advantage of them here at Mayo. But there's also places where the vendor systems aren't sufficient for Mayo. So when we began our project, for example, one of the things that's important at Mayo and is part of the magic of Mayo is that someone can come visit from a long way away and get a complex itinerary managed in just a few days, right? So that someone doesn't have to fly back. If you're going to your local hospital to say, come back next Thursday for an imaging study or for a lab, maybe that's not such a big deal, but it is here.
Yeah.
And the system that Epic had was great for managing appointments, but it didn't have that way to manage that tight itinerary. So we taught Epic how we did it here, and they built those capabilities into their software, and then it got released here as part of our activities. And it just maybe a small example of the kinds of things we want to do to make these systems really work for patients.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot going on in healthcare. So what are some of the issues that you and your colleagues are wrestling with right now?
Well, right now at Mayo, part of what we're wrestling with a lot is, again, any new system creates change, and change is hard. We did absolutely everything we could to get the system designed the way our clinicians wanted. There was a long series of design sessions that lasted almost a year called Collaborative Build, where we brought together the designated experts of all medical practices, again, physicians through nurses through pharmacists, to ask them what they wanted. And we took all of that input based on what we had been doing for years and ways that we thought we could do things better, and we built that into the Epic system. But even as hard as you try to get it right, you can't get absolutely everything right. We learned a lot in our first go live in Wisconsin. We learned some more in our go live in Minnesota. We learned more when we went live in Rochester, and then we finished in Arizona and Florida. And in each of those builds, we put in something new. All that said, there's still things we can do to improve the experience for our physicians. Our CEO, Dr. Gianrico Ferrugia, likes to talk about joy at work. And one of the things that's important to joy at work for our clinicians is when they sit down to interact with a patient and they're using an electronic tool to support them, does that experience feel good to them? Do they feel like they can give the patient the attention that they need, that the interaction that they have with the system is easy? Do they have all the information that they need, that the patient, that's needed for patient care, et cetera, et cetera? So a lot of work was done to improve the process for ordering about 6 months ago. There's a lot of focus now on things like improving inbox, which is the messaging between the patient and the clinician and clinician to clinician. And then some other areas as well that we'll continue to work to improve. So that's a big focus for us right now, frankly, is to make the experience great for our clinicians.
Yeah, so efforts are underway right now to continue to optimize our electronic medical record.
Right.
So from a clinician's perspective, what does it mean to them to optimize their workflow?
Yeah. Well, some of it is we need to get all of the obvious things out of the way. We need to get all sorts of improvements that work for everyone. But then the next step is, how has it become personalized and customized for a clinician? You know, we've got, out of our thousands of clinicians, specialty, subspecialty, sub-subspecialty. And the way that an electronic health record system looks for a physician in general practice in our health system is very different than someone in a deep specialty area at a destination center. Because of that, this personalization, where a physician can set up the workflow the way that they want it on the screen so that their common orders show up the way they want them to show up, has been really important. So part of it is training the system, for sure, and that's where we start. but some of it is also training the user and getting them accustomed to how the system works, and then also guiding them and getting their input so that they can set up the system just the way they want it for themselves. All of us work with these electronic systems all the time. When I look at my phone, it probably looks different than the way you look at your phone, just because I want to have things a little bit different on the screen.
Yeah.
By analogy, the same thing is true with an EHR. The difference with an EHR is there's just an enormous amount of data that confronts a physician or a nurse when they're treating a patient.
Okay. So Mayo Clinic is in the process of developing a platform to support our information technology and digital tools and healthcare interactions, transactions with consumers and other businesses. So what does this platform look like to you in the future, and how do you think it'll transform healthcare at Mayo Clinic?
Yeah. The word platform is something that's really overused, especially by us technologists. So I'll do my best to kind of stay away from buzzwords. But if you think about technology at Mayo, it's useful, at least in my mind, to think about it as two parts. One part is kind of the core clinical systems that we use to manage care for our patients every day. And some of that, to be honest, is kind of a commodity kind of system. If you look at our EHR, it's not that much different than an EHR that you would find at another healthcare system. We've got some special sauce baked into it, like our scheduling system, like the orders that our clinicians use. There's some decision support that's specialized to Mayo, all those kinds of things. The second piece, which is really where this platform thing comes into mind, is how do we differentiate ourselves using technology? Everybody's got an EHR nowadays. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe that wasn't so, but it is now. So when our clinicians think about being at the cutting edge, they're thinking about analytics, decision support, ability to see patients in ways that you can't otherwise see them. So that's where the machine learning and artificial intelligence comes into play. Natural language processing that helps a clinician make sense of a massive record. So to support that, we built a modern data infrastructure. We call this the Unified Data Platform. And from that, then, we can build all these innovative new kinds of systems.
Okay, great. So Jan, can you comment on how big of a change the Epic implementation was?
Well, I think Cris covered it a little bit. It really was huge. But before I answer that direct question, I just wanted to build off of a little bit about what Cris talked about related to the electronic health record. Because at Mayo Clinic, the electronic health record is a core process. And it really optimizes our quality, our safety, and our efficiency in delivering patient care here. And to that end, ME&C has collaborated with IT, Cris and his colleagues, with informatics, with our vendor partners and external consultants over the years, along with our subject matter experts internally who are telling us constantly what it is that they want and what they need. And that really has been key to our journey to transition from paper to a computerized medical record, and then from these standalone systems that we had at Mayo Clinic to this comprehensive integrated system that we have today with Epic. So again, to build off of Chris's comment about magic happens here every day, and I think to understand that magic, you have to get underneath the hood and really understand how our care teams interact with the electronic health record, what works for them and what doesn't. So how does scheduling occur? How does the patient go from getting an order for a colonoscopy and arriving in GI, having had picked up their prep, done their prep, and now they're ready for their actual procedure? What does ordering look like from end to end? And then how do people document the care that they give to the patients here at Mayo Clinic? Those are like the core processes of Mayo. And in our department, this isn't a one and done thing. You don't implement a new EHR and okay, good job everybody, we're all done. We're going to spend the rest of our lives and the rest of our careers here, optimizing this to work for Mayo Clinic. So in terms of, how big was this? If we could have the graphic I'll just talk about a few numbers because this really was a huge project. Mayo Clinic, as you know, is the largest integrated not-for-profit medical group in the world. So when you want to make a change here, it's going to be a big change. We created a team of over 500 internal Mayo Clinic staff that were supplemented by vendor staff from Epic and external consultants to really form our core team that worked on the project from beginning until end in that phased implementation. You can see on the graphic a lot of numbers, and I kind of laugh. I was home over the weekend and saw a little bit too much of the Today Show than I normally do, and Al Roker was commiserating about the storm that's moving across the upper Midwest, and they use these numbers like 35 million people are in the path of this winter storm. And so we use those numbers too to kind of shock people into understanding that you're an employee at Mayo Clinic, this is probably going to impact you. So let me just talk about a few things. Essentially, about 80% of our overall staff at Mayo Clinic were impacted by this, so about 52,000 end users. And you think about 52,000 people being trained to go live. 43 Epic modules were implemented. Historically here, we have implemented one module at a time, one department followed by another department over the course of a year. And so here we're flipping on 43 brand new modules at one time. Over 200 legacy systems were sunsetted. These are vended systems that we customized or things that we built here at Mayo Clinic to make Mayo Clinic function. That was a big deal. We mapped over 1,400 workflows, and 60 sites were impacted by this. That included 22 hospitals, over 3,000 beds, and 80 clinics moved to this new future state. There were 4 go-lives over 15 months that were complicated by 3 time zones. So in addition to all that, we engaged our staff. We created networks. We had over 3,500 inpatient and allied health staff, 600 providers, and 800 administrators that attended monthly forums that we created. And their role was to, synthesize the information that they heard in these forums and take back what was relevant to their colleagues. So again, it was a huge project with a lot of engagement from beginning to end, in that we are continuing to adopt and adapt to the system every single day.
Yeah, every time I hear those statistics, I'm just amazed at how great work that our team has done. I mean, it is teamwork. It's all hands on deck.
Absolutely.
So in what spaces did ME&C bring value to the project?
Well, I personally, this was like, I have many highlights in my 40-year career here at Mayo Clinic, and this was one of them. We had over 60 FTE from ME&C who were involved in this. They were fully allocated to the project from beginning to end, and that included leadership, administrative assistants, engineers, and project managers. And our engineers went to Verona and achieved Epic certification in those core processes that I talked about. So orders and scheduling and billing and nurse triage and OB and surgery, all those areas that are so critical to, this being a well-oiled machine, if you will. And that in-depth knowledge of how Epic functions really positioned our engineers very well for the process redesign work that they did in converging thousands of workflows. It positioned them to understand the change that was going to happen and to help support the implementation of the new EHR. Our staff also facilitated all the moving parts and the resources around the design and build of new order sets and templates. That was tons of work, like over 5,000 order sets. Mayo Clinic, we always tell everybody we're very complex. And I think it wasn't until we got to this part of the project where we're designing specialty and subspecialty order sets and templates that our vendor and our external consultant really realized how complex Mayo Clinic was. our engineers mapped out all the future state workflows and brought those workflows to the end users and said, here's what this process is going to look like in the future. And we had them tell us how big of a change that is. Is it small, medium, or large? Anything that was ranked medium or large, we wanted to create some activity around that. And as Tony mentioned, we led the change management efforts from end to end. Our engineers, because they knew the system very well, were able to do demos all across the enterprise for different practices so that they could help to understand the change. And then the last couple of things I would mention is that we also analyzed data around the pre and post change readiness surveys that were conducted across the enterprise. They analyzed that data, and that really helped to drive the tactics that we used to help people get ready to adopt the new system. So, Chris, you mentioned how in Wisconsin we learned from that. So when we did the post-implementation survey there, one of the questions was implementing Epic harder or easier than you thought? 80–90% of the people responded it was much harder than they thought it was. That one piece of data was a wake-up call for the Minnesota Go Live and the Rochester Go Live to say, this is going to be really hard, people. So pay attention to the information that's coming out. Attend the sessions that are developed for you and go to training. And so that data analysis was very helpful. And the last thing is that we supported all the command centers. During each one of the 4 Go Lives, we helped with SWAT teams. One thing we learned through this whole process was that any area that was very complicated before Epic was complicated during the Go Live. So areas like the Infusion Therapy Center, by the time Florida and Arizona came along, we actually had the SWAT team ready to go before we even went live. That's how much we learned from how difficult it was in Rochester. So those are just a couple of key things I think that ME&C did to help with the implementation of Epic.
Wow, that's a lot of work. Now that the implementation is complete, what role is ME&C playing in the optimization efforts?
So, like we said, this will go on forever, and at any one time, since the Florida and Arizona implementation in October of 2017, at any one time we have about 30 FTE that are working on projects that are directly related to the EHR. The 3 spaces, as Chris mentioned, orders. We've created the easy panels, which is to help the ordering provider pick the right thing for the patient. So that's been a big space. In basket is another space. And scheduling, trying to optimize scheduling. I don't know if we'll ever be able to replace the scheduling functionality that we had and customized here at Mayo Clinic over the course of 25 years. So there will continue to be work in that space. We've also been optimizing, if you will, like the bedside tool on the iPad for patients, and the use of the kiosks and the opioid workflow, and we did Kaizen events in the Pediatric Infusion Therapy Center. So those are just some examples of some of the projects, but on a weekly basis there's some project that everything we do here touches the EHR.
Yeah, so certain, yes. So Chris, we recently announced a partnership with Google. What does that mean for Mayo Clinic, and what does this mean for healthcare?
Yeah. Well, it's really exciting, and we're well underway. But let me back up a little bit about why we did it. I used the word platform before. Again, if for those at home playing buzzword bingo, I'm going to go back to techie buzzword bingo. Platform, when I talked about it before, I was referring to a technology thing, right? Mm-hmm. But there's also this idea of platform in a business context. And the kind of platform businesses that people might be familiar with are things like Airbnb or Uber. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's those businesses about? Well, the magic of those businesses are Uber didn't build cars or even buy cars or hire drivers. They connected people who had a need, which is I need a ride, with some excess capacity. I have a car and I don't use it all the time. Same thing here in Airbnb. Travelers looking for a different kind of experience There's plenty of hotels available, but staying in a house or an apartment can give people a different travel experience. Okay. So there's a hypothesis that makes a lot of sense to me, which is that same business model is going to move out of travel, hospitality, retail, all the other industries that have been changed by these kind of platform businesses. That's going to show up in healthcare. And Dr. Farrugia and our Board of Governors have the hypothesis that we want to be that platform rather than being displaced by that platform. So what we want to create is the ability to connect people who have need, patients who are looking for treatment for serious and complex illness, with people who have solutions. And that might be a new medical discovery. It might be a monitoring device. It might be some capability in the communities where people live. It could be a lot of things. And in order to do that, we need to build a worldwide platform that allows Mayo Clinic to touch all these people and to create all these, a venue where these solution providers can meet patients, curated by Mayo standards of medical care and scientific excellence and the way that we know we can take care of patients. So that's the promise, and we're just getting started. So we went through a selection process last spring to identify which of the many or several worldwide cloud companies would be the best partner for us to accomplish that. We looked at several. It was a very rigorous process, and we ended up with Google. Why? Number one, Google has a substantial lead over the other companies in this space in the ability to generate artificial intelligence. Number two, the cloud providers, and you've seen some of this in the news, are all seeking ways to create answers for healthcare. Rewind a couple of years ago and people would express frustration at the way that healthcare can sometimes be pretty badly broken. Mm-hmm. And they would say, well, why can't a company like Apple or Google or Microsoft fix this problem? Well, guess what? They want to fix this problem. So they've invested a lot in the way to manage healthcare data in sophisticated ways. We had built some of that capability using tools from others and some from our own engineers. But what Google and others have done has surpassed that, and Google was clearly in the lead for us. The third reason why we were interested in Google is, think about it. When you have a health problem, where do you go? You might go to the Mayo Clinic website, but for a lot of people, the first place they go is Google. And Google tells us, for example, that more than half of the emergency room visits in the US, they know that there was a search done to Google in the 2 hours before that visit happened. People are going to Google to get a first answer to then find out something else. So we wanted to partner with that and not compete with that. Okay? So that's the kind of business idea behind what we want to do with Google. So our agreement has two big parts. The first part, and we really want to explain this carefully, because there's lots of concerns about how we manage the privacy of patient data, and we want to assure people that we're managing it to the highest possible standards, not just the law, but Mayo Clinic's standards for how we want to treat patients. So part one of the agreement is we're moving basically a copy of all of our data to a Mayo Clinic cloud within the Google Cloud Platform, right? We own the keys. It's confidential data. Google can't see the data. They can't use the data. It's managed by us for our patients, right? That's part one. And we're in the process of doing that right now. We're setting up those environments. We're figuring out how to make them secure and performant. And within the next couple of weeks, we'll begin to move data into the Mayo Clinic cloud. And within about a year, that cloud environment will be ready for first use, but then we'll be building it out for years to come after that. But that's part one of the agreement. Part two, we've been talking to various parts of Google for the last couple of years as they've evolved their business, as we've evolved our business. And the thing that we found in visit after visit after visit is we could put our Mayo Clinic physician scientists side by side with a Google physician scientists, and they're employing a lot of not just world-class computer scientists, they're hiring world-class physicians. And when we put them in the same room with each other, they all saw the same problems. They all saw the same promise. We wanted to work on similar things, and there was a level of excitement. So now we've been able to unleash that. We have a joint steering committee that meets between Mayo and Google on a monthly basis, and then there's ongoing process between those monthly meetings. We've identified candidate projects that we want to work on together in areas like radiation oncology, cardiology, and other spaces. And we're really excited about the things to come as we invest in the future. As a capstone to that, Google will open an office here in Rochester, Minnesota. They expect to have 40 engineers here to work with our physician scientists to create breakthroughs to help our patients. So a lot of promise, a lot of excitement, but we also have to be extremely careful that we are managing the data carefully in a secure way to meet our promise to our patients while we're also pursuing cures. And to me, the most exciting thing here is the potential for more cures that comes from more data is just enormous. And I'm pretty convinced that if we continue to stick to Mayo standards and the things we've always done, we'll be able to pursue more cures while also maintaining privacy for our patients.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
So, AI has been in the news so much lately. What is Mayo's approach to using AI and partnering with clinicians and scientists in our three shields: education, research, and the practice?
Yeah. The best way maybe to get people an idea of it is to give examples of specific projects, and some of these I think are just fantastic. So there was a paper that was published maybe 6 weeks ago in The Lancet, well-known British publication, that looked at patients that had atrial fibrillation, a common medical condition that's sometimes difficult to diagnose, because unless you can see a patient when they're having an AFib event, you don't know if they have AFib. Right? So it's a little bit of a problem. So our scientists took two cohorts, one that were known to have AFib and one which were known not to have AFib. They then took, from the patients that had atrial fibrillation, they took the AFib events out of their ECG records, right? So you couldn't actually see the AFib event. And then they had the machine look at those two set of patterns to determine, could they tell apart the patients with AFib and the patients without. It turns out it can, with a high level of specificity and sensitivity. So what that means is that we could put an ECG on a patient who's not having an AFib event, and we can tell if they have AFib, for example. Well, that substantially improves the ability of our cardiologists to do diagnosis and treatment. Another example comes out of radiology. Some work that's been done around determining the genomic content of a tumor by looking at an image. And it turns out that for certain glioblastomas, which is a common and fatal brain tumor, it's possible to tell the actual DNA component of that tumor by looking at the texture of the tumor in a way that a radiologist might not be able to see with a naked eye. But the machine can. So now we can avoid potentially biopsy of the brain going through the skull, instead be able to tell what the DNA characteristic of that tumor is, or the genetic component of that tumor without the biopsy. I'll use an example that Google is doing. They've done analysis of retinas so that they can diagnose diabetic retinopathy in a easy, low-cost way. And it's something that they've begun to deploy in the third world, in parts of India, which don't have good medical care, and in Africa. And they can diagnose an illness that's treatable and which would otherwise lead to blindness. Again, simple, easy technologies, or relatively simple and easy technologies in the field, backed up by very sophisticated technologies in the cloud. So it gives you some examples of the kinds of things that we're working on. The real challenge will be it's challenging to build one of these sophisticated algorithmic models. The next generation challenge will be, how do we speed the time from lab to bedside? And We've all heard about this lag of 17 years of discovery to common treatment. We can't wait 17 years for cures anymore. We've got to find ways to move more quickly through the regulatory and approval process. There's new FDA processes around software as a medical device, and we're learning more and more about that so that we can, again, bring cure to patients quickly and effectively.
Okay. Jan, what does ME&C bring to the table in the digital space?
This is a really exciting time, I think, in healthcare. And ME&C, because we've been at Mayo Clinic for 70 years, we've developed enduring relationships with our administrators, people in the practice, research and education. And when they're excited about some future development or cure, we like to be considered like a connector. We can bring groups of people together to help solve and analyze a problem. So groups like business development, legal, compliance, risk, we can identify the need for those and bring those people together quickly to solve a problem. I think the other thing is that we're adaptable. So we've adapted our service lines over the years to meet the needs of Mayo Clinic, and we're upskilling our staff or hiring new staff that are bringing those skills to the table for us to help augment the skills and abilities that we have. But I think we also know that leveraging our engineering, analytics, and consulting in healthcare delivery is one of our sustaining differentiators for Mayo Clinic. Unlike an external consulting group, if you hired them and brought them in, they don't have the relationships that we have, so it really does help us to move things along a little bit more quickly. We also develop and use cutting-edge frameworks and methodologies. Tony and I heard of one this morning, a framework for vetting ideas. So the 200 or 300 AI projects that are making their way through the different approval processes, we've created a framework to help get these through quickly. We have, healthcare is very conservative, and 17-year lag sometimes in adoption of new tools. I mean, seriously, they told us to shut our pagers off before we came to the table today. So they're still using pagers and fax machines, in the delivery of healthcare today. So I think we know that lives are at stake when you're changing a step in a workflow for a care team or a provider. And one of the things that we do is we try to integrate that step into the workflow instead of plopping it on top of the workflow and expecting the providers and the care team to figure it out. An example of that is the clinical trial matching work that we've done with the Watson IBM system. And so a provider, they can't keep up with all the different clinical trials that are out there. So they're seeing a patient with breast cancer or lung cancer. They have no idea that there are 3 really great clinical trials that this patient could be eligible for. So now you run this tool in the background, and the provider meets with the patient and can say, you're eligible for these clinical trials. I'm going to have my clinical trials nurse come in and visit with you about that and answer your questions. So those are some of the things that we bring to the table in this new space, and we'll continue to grow our skills and hopefully bring more things to the table for Mayo Clinic.
Great.
Mayo Clinic.
So Chris, what advice would you give to hospital and health system administrative leaders when they want to implement digital tools such as machine learning or AI or other things?
Yeah, so let me talk about AI and let me talk about digital as maybe separate things, even though they overlap. For AI, machine learning is just math. It's not magic. So the biggest 2 pieces of getting the math right, which then makes it look like magic, is first, have you asked a good question? That's the thing that I think we keep saying to scientists who say, I want to do some of this AI stuff. Well, what question do you think needs to be asked? And what problem does a human being struggle with? I struggle with lifting things heavier than 150 pounds. But a forklift, no problem. Same thing happens with a with the machine. What's the problem I want to solve? And then the other part of it is give the machine good data to try and figure something out. We used to talk about big data a lot, and even in the world of big data, there's also a difference between good data and bad data. A lot of times the first step for a scientist to do is to annotate the data and improve it to make sure that the machine knows exactly what's going on with that image or that waveform or that piece of language, so that the machine can make heads or tails of the question it's being asked. So I'd start with sort of practical things more than that. In the digital space, everybody talks about, what does the digital world mean? What I would say is, in healthcare, we've spent maybe the last 20 to 40 years automating healthcare, figuring out how to take tasks that we used to do on paper and do them on a computer in some fashion to make work more efficient. We used to have pneumatic tubes that moved reports around Mayo Clinic. Well, we don't anymore. We use it for lab stuff, but we don't use it for records anymore because we can move it electronically. So we've automated stuff. Digital means starting thinking a little bit differently. The world kind of changed in about 2007 when these phones started to appear. And now we have the internet and a supercomputer in our pockets every day. And we all expect to be able to have the answer to any question at any time. Remember, you used to go you'd sit at the bar and you'd argue with your buddies about who won the World Series in some year. Well, you don't argue anymore. Who Googles first?
Yeah,
that's the way you solve this problem.
Fastest fingers.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way it all happens. So if we're thinking about healthcare in that world, the difference in the new way of thinking is to start with what's the consumer's experience when they've got one of these things in their hands. How can you think about some product or service that never existed before when we didn't have these kinds of capabilities? We'll always be doing automation work. As Jan says, the work of improving our records and our systems that manage the workflow and the passage of people, our physical presence in these facilities will always be there. But how can I experience healthcare at home, or when I'm in a different state, or if I'm in a different country? How can these devices help monitor my health and give me advice about things I might be able to do differently? How can I get answers? How can I get reassurance? How can I communicate with my mom, who I provide, support for as she goes through her health challenges? All those things are the frontier of digital. And I think for the most part, the progressive organizations are coming at it from that standpoint of how could I do something different now that I have these tools at hand.
Great answer. And Jan, what advice would you give to our health systems engineers and project managers as they implement new digital tools in their healthcare organization?
To reiterate some of the things that I've mentioned already, collaboration is like number one. We don't do anything here alone. Change management can be very effective if done well. Most organizations hire somebody else to come in and do change management for them for a large transformational change. I believe that one of the reasons why our team was so effective is because we were internal to Mayo, that we knew Mayo Clinic, we knew the committee structures, we knew the meeting structures. We didn't add things onto people's calendars, we used existing things. And those kinds of insider pieces of information an external group doesn't know. So I think if done well, it can make a big difference. Measure it, get feedback from people and be willing to make changes.
Great, good. Well, now we have a little time to take questions from our audience. The first one, Jan, you discussed training and educating the clinicians and teams was monumental. Can you and Cris talk about our approach to training and education? Did it differ in any way from the traditional EHR training process? Did benchmarking with other institutions help influence our training?
I'll take the first stab at this one.
Go for it.
So we traveled, I personally didn't, but our leaders traveled to many other large academic medical centers to understand how their go-lives went and what to stay away from and what to definitely do. And so one thing I would say, the message that they got was, you can't take a provider and put them in a classroom for 14 hours. It's just not going to work. And so we did minimal classroom training. All classrooms were supplemented with a provider who was a subject matter expert in the area. And so, if I'm a group of cardiologists in training, it's so much the better that one of my colleagues is there to help understand the information that's being taught. So minimal time in the classroom supplemented with e-learnings. But I think after the go live is where you need to keep going at training, because we have a lot to learn about Epic. It's a very complicated system, and so our training group now is doing boot camps to give people more information about how to make things better for them.
Anything to add, Chris?
I think Jan hit it. I think the big difference is, I'll go back to something that she said, the difference was we did 43 modules all at once and not one at a time. So we made everyone change everything all at one point. So of course you can't take it all in. So I love the phrase reboot camps, for folks to just say, okay, now that I've been in this system for whatever period of time, let me take another fresh look. There's probably new things I can learn.
Okay, great. Another question here. Can you share what worked really, really well? And were there any positive applications of the system that were not envisioned by the team? A creative use of an application no one had seen before?
The questioner may have a great answer in mind. I don't know. I'm not sure we did anything in that space that was really, really unique. There's maybe one, and I would suggest, well, I'll say two. One is we created a group to look at the usability of the system that wasn't responsible for delivering the actual system itself. We hadn't seen that anyplace else. And so that group was just independently looking at meeting with doctors and nurses and pharmacists and asking them, what do you want? What would work, what wouldn't? I wish we had actually doubled that amount of effort. I think we would have gotten even more dividends out of it. Because having someone look at the system who isn't responsible for actually building it gives you a sense of freedom that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Okay.
So I think there's more we can learn from that, and we're not done with that. We'll keep working on usability for a long time, but I think that helped. The second was we did a thing in moving data. I said we moved 10 years of data to the EHR, but we've got medical digital records that go back further than that, 25, 30 years. And so we created this thing called a historical viewer. So in the EHR record, if there's data about a patient that's older than 10 years, and for some of our patients that's an important part of their care, there's a little indicator that that's true, and you can press a button, and then you can look at the data from more than 10 years ago. And we've gotten feedback that that's been really useful, and it's been somewhat unique. I think a lot of other health systems didn't move any data into their new system, or maybe they just moved the last week's worth of data. And so clinicians were always going back and forth between two different systems, which we know is a patient safety problem and definitely a dissatisfier to clinicians. One well-known health system close to us, I was talking with their CIO, and they said, we finally turned off our old EHR. And I said, well, how long did you keep it running? And that CIO said 10 years. And I just about fell out of my chair. I couldn't imagine how hard that would be for a clinician. And this is a good healthcare system. That they made their clinicians have to deal with two systems for a decade. Holy smokes.
Hey, Tony, if I could add one thing to that. While Chris was talking, I had time to come up with something. So something that we did before the go-lives was we took a very common workflow that people do day to day in the outpatient or the inpatient setting, and we created a script, and we allowed those care teams to work together and follow that script, use the system, and become comfortable with that new workflow before go live. I think that was a very, very effective, so that the standard, processes that you need to do over and over and over again, you had experience with that before the actual go live.
Well, great. Well, we're running out of time here, so I want to thank our guest speakers and everyone for attending our Management Engineering and Consulting webinar. Please feel free to contact us by calling us at 507-284-3424 or visiting our website at mec.mayoclinic.org if you have any questions about our external consulting services.